Dear students, today we are here to discuss about a brief introduction into the modern Indian history, and all of you might have studied about the modern Indian history right from your high school days, but for the examination point of view, civil service examination point of view, we have to discuss about modern India, which starts from the arrival of the Europeans, advent of Europeans to India in the 15th century AD, and it will take you up to the attainment of independence in 1947. So, we are going to discuss in brief about the events that are going to happen in the history. Arrival of the Europeans starts in the 15th century AD, and four important foreign powers are going to enter into the Indian soil, starting from the Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, then the Britishers and the French are going to come here basically with the purpose of the trade and commerce, which we call as the mercantilism, with which intention they come here. But after they entered the Indian territory, they saw that the people of India were not united, and the 500 plus principalities which were ruling in India at that time, they were quarreling among themselves, and by taking advantage of the political disunity and the cultural diversities that were there and the religious animosities that was going on this soil, that became a fertile ground for these colonial and imperial powers to slowly establish their power in the country, starting with the advent of the Portuguese, and the first sea route was discovered by Vasco da Gama, who was successful in getting the sea route from European land to the Indian territory, and he landed in Calicut in 1498 and was welcomed by the Hindu king Zamorin, and from 1498 our journey starts of the modern Indian history, and followed by the Portuguese, the Dutch East India Company came, then the British East India Company comes, followed by the French East India Company. So, in the beginning these companies were primarily interested in trade and commerce, especially in the spice trade like the black pepper, cardamom and various spice products which were badly required in the European market at that point of time. But later on they start looting the raw materials of our country, especially coal and cotton. They are going to take in a big way, and in a course of 100 years, by the year 1757, the Britishers are going to establish their empire very systematically by taking the help of our own people, like taking the help of Mir Jafar, who was the army chief of Siraj ud-Dawla, the Nawab of Bengal, and in the historical battle of Plassey of 1757, the Britishers are going to capture Bengal by defeating Siraj ud-Dawla, the Nawab of Bengal. So, from 1757 onwards, the British East India Company is going to get political control of this land, and Robert Clive becomes first governor who starts administration in Bengal under the brand, under the name of the diarchy. Introduction of diarchy is the beginning of the British rule in Bengal, and slowly and steadily the Britishers are going to interfere in the various political affairs of our people, and a series of wars they are going to make, like the Carnatic wars, the Mysore wars, the Anglo-Maratha wars, the Anglo-Sikh wars, and in all these wars, because of two important reasons. One is the superiority of the British army and the disunity among the rulers, and the role of treacherous betrayers who sided with the Britishers at regular intervals. So, we are going to lose the battle of the things, and the Britishers are going to establish their rule firmly, and by the year 1773 almost entire India is going to come under the British rule, and they are going to rule us in a very systematic way under the provisions of the Regulating Act of 1773, which is called as the official beginning of the British rule in India. And then onwards they are going to start the rule of the Governor Generals. So, totally 23 Governor Generals have ruled this country, starting from Warren Hastings going up to Lord Canning. So, but from your examination point of view, you have to remember 4 Governor Generals who have ruled this country, starting with Lord Cornwallis, who is called as the economic pillar of the British Empire in India by the introduction of the permanent settlement of land in Bengal, which led to the growth of the zamindari system or the landlord system in the country. And during the time of Cornwallis only, some important wars are fought, especially in the south, the Third Anglo-Mysore War, in which he is going to defeat Tipu Sultan near Srirangapattanam, and with the defeat of Tipu Sultan, the South India is going to come under the control of the Britishers. Then after him, we have to focus on Lord Wellesley, who introduces a new system called subsidiary alliance system, under which the Indian princely rulers are going to enter into a defence treaty with the British East India Company, but under the name of subsidiary alliance, the Britishers are going to capture our territories and principalities one by one, and they are going to lose their political power, political privileges, and also the control over administration indirectly. And it was Lord Wellesley who is called as the military pillar of the British Empire, and as many as 67 principalities are going to come under the control of the Britishers. And he is also the person who was responsible for the elimination of two important rivals for the East India Company in India. One is Tipu Sultan, who is going to be killed in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War of 1799 near Srirangapattanam, and it was Peshwe Bajirao II who is going to be defeated by Lord Wellesley in the Second Anglo-Maratha War of 1802, which ends up in the Treaty of Basin, which is called as the Treaty of Surrender of the Maratha Power to the Britishers. So, during the time of Lord Wellesley, the military expansion is done very systematically, and we call Lord Wellesley as the military pillar of the British Empire in India. And after that, we have to focus on the another important Governor General, Lord William Bentinck, who is called as the social pillar or the cultural pillar of the British Empire in India. And it is during the time of Lord William Bentinck, social reforms are done in the Indian society, especially a special mention has to be made about abolition of sati in 1829. The practice of sati was legally banned by the Lord William Bentinck, and it was also equally supported by our own social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and Justice M.J. Ranade of Pune, who were great social reformers of that time. So, with their help, the social reform was initiated in India, and that is called as the beginning of modernity in the Indian society, and you can also call it as the beginning of Renaissance in India. And the slowly India started moving towards modern thinking, and westernized thinking starts during the time of Lord Bentinck. And another major significant event which I have to make note of is the introduction of English. It was Lord William Bentinck who introduced English language first time in India in 1835. Of course, as per the recommendation of Lord Macaulay, who was a law member in his executive council. It is famous in the history as Macaulay's Minute. So, as per the Macaulay's Minute, English was introduced first time in India in 1835, and with the impact of the English language, two things happened in the country. One is the cultural transformation starts in the country. Slowly, Indians started following, imitating the Western lifestyle of the Britishers, and to quote the words of historian Dr. R.C. Majumdar, Bharat became India. So, earlier it was Bharat, but now we have started becoming India in the English sense of the term, and slowly our people starting the lifestyle, imitating the lifestyle of the Britishers. So, that was a cultural transformation starting at that time. But if you see from another angle, it is the English which helped us to understand the Western principles of democracy, liberty, equality, and indirectly it was English education which is going to lay the foundation for our freedom movement. And it is from the introduction of English only the thinking of modernism, nationalism, oneness of the Indians as a whole starts in our country. And most of our freedom fighters and leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi ji, they were all the products of English education. It is through the English education only we started asserting our powers, and India started rising above as one nation forgetting about our differences of religion, caste, color, region and other subnational forces. So, indirectly we can say that the introduction of English, although it led to the cultural slavery, on the other hand it led to the political freedom or emancipation of India from the colonial rule. So, we call Lord Bentinck as the founder of cultural empire, at the same time the beginner of nationalism in our country. And then we have to discuss about Lord Dalhousie, who comes as the next Governor General. And during the time of Lord Dalhousie, military expansion is done, and by introduction of the doctrine of lapse, so many principalities were taken over by the Britishers, saying that if a Hindu ruler dies without a son, that principality will be automatically taken over by the British East India Company, and more than 67 principalities were taken over by Dalhousie, including Satara in Maharashtra and Jhansi in Uttar Pradesh. So, these principalities are going to participate very strongly later on in the mutiny. So, the policy of expansion is started by Dalhousie, and the introduction of doctrine of lapse became major reason in the precipitating of the events towards a mutiny, and Sepoy Mutiny is going to take place in the year 1857, which is called as a major turning point in the history of modern India. And initially it was started by the soldiers for their grievances, led by Mangal Pandey, who starts the mutiny on March 29, 1857 in Barakpur in Bengal. So, from there the mutiny begins and soon spreads across major areas of India, especially in North India, places like Sambhalpur, Jaipur, Ahrar, Bareilly, Lucknow, Agra, Kanpur, Delhi, and the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II himself participates in the mutiny. Jhansi Rani Lakshmibai participates in the mutiny, and Begum Hazrat Mal, the wife of the Nawab of Awadh, also take part, and Nana Saheb, the deposed Peshwa, and his lieutenant Tantia Tope, known for guerrilla warfare. All these great leaders participate in the mutiny, but because the mutiny was not properly organized and proper inspiration was not there for among the soldiers, ultimately the mutiny is going to be suppressed by the Britishers, and by 1858 the mutiny was subsided, and most of the leaders who had participated in the mutiny, either they have been killed or they have been arrested and sent to jail, and by 1858 the Britishers will re-establish their supremacy authority in India. But after the Sepoy Mutiny overs in 1858, there is a change of administration. Now, India comes under the direct rule of the British government, and to notify the change, Queen Victoria makes a declaration in 1858, which is called as Queen Proclamation or Magna Carta of the Indian people in 1858, under which the change of administration will take over. Instead of Governor General, now we are going to be ruled by the Viceroys, and a council is going to be created in England with 15 members headed by Secretary of State. So, it is called as the Viceroy's rule, and from 1858 onwards we are coming under the direct rule of the Viceroys, and totally 21 Viceroys have ruled this country. But from your examination point of view, we have to discuss only 3 Viceroys: Lord Lytton, Lord Ripon and Lord Curzon. Lord Ripon stands as an anti-Indian model. Whatever he did was in the interest of Britishers, and he created a lot of troubles for Indians by his anti-Indian policies, like the Vernacular Press Act, Arms Act, organization of Grand Darbar in Calcutta, and the establishment of Aligarh Muslim School, encouraging the separatist forces of Muslim minorities started in his time, followed by Lord Ripon, who was a great ruler, and his rule is considered as pro-Indian rule, and lot of positive things happened in India under Lord Ripon, especially the passing of Local Self-Government Act, passing of the Factory Act, conducting of the first census operation in India in 1881, and he was the first Viceroy who wanted to give equal powers to the Indian judges, but the bill was severely opposed by the Europeans in India, and because of the Ilbert Bill controversy, Lord Ripon resigned in 1884, and his rule ends with the controversy of the Ilbert Bill. And then we have to focus on Lord Curzon, who is a blend of both. Part of his rule was pro-Indian and part of his rule was anti-Indian. Especially we remember Curzon for three important things. One is the police reforms he did in India, and the passing of the Indian Paper Currency Act, and the passing of the Ancient Monuments Protection Act of 1904 are the major contributions of Lord Curzon, but he disturbed India by making partition of Bengal in 1905 into East Bengal and West Bengal, and it is from that time only the communal politics starts in the country, and Hindu-Muslim rift and communal clashes commence on the Indian soil from 1905 onwards. And it was also Curzon who introduced two dangerous laws for the country. One is called the Official Secrets Act and the Sedition Act of 1905, under which series of leaders and revolutionary people were arrested and leaders were kept behind bar under the provisions of the Sedition Act. So, the intention of Lord Curzon was to suppress the freedom movement in Bengal, but later on the movement is going to gain the momentum, and from 1885 onwards we will start focusing on the national movement of India, which starts with the birth of the Indian National Congress by Abel Hume in 1885. So, from 1885 to 1947, it is a journey of India's national movement, which we will discuss under three broad categories, as the first phase led by moderates 1885 to 1905, and great leaders like Dadabhai Nauroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, S.N. Banerjee, R.C. Dutt, G. Subramaniam Iyer, and a galaxy of leaders will lead the first phase, but it was a moderate phase. We are not able to achieve anything big in the first phase because of the gentle approach followed by our leaders. Then we will enter into the second phase called the extremist phase from 1905 to 1915. Series of strong revolutionary leaders will emerge on the scene. People like Lal Bal Pal and galaxy of revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, V.D. Savarkar, Udham Singh, Madan Lal Dhingra, and Rama Prasad Bismillah. So, all these great leaders, revolutionaries, they sacrificed their life in the second phase, but the Britishers are going to suppress our revolutionary activities with the dangerous laws like the Rowlatt Act, Defence of India Act, Explosives Substances Prevention Act. So, by various dangerous laws, they are going to suppress our mutineers and the revolutionaries very badly, brutally, and later on we will enter in 1915 the final phase of the freedom movement, which is called as the Gandhian Era. So, Gandhiji arrives from South Africa in 1915. So, under the Gandhian leadership, two new principles are put into action, Satya or Ahimsa, truth and non-violence, with which Gandhiji organizes the nation, inspires the common people, and by taking the help of the mass of people, Gandhiji leads the freedom movement in a very systematic way, in a non-violent way, starting from the Champaran Satyagraha of 1917. He takes us successfully to the goal post of freedom in 1947, and series of events will take place under the Gandhian leadership like the Kheda Satyagraha, the Khilafat movement, the non-cooperation movement, the Swaraj Party, the starting of the Quit India movement, the arrival of Simon Commission, round table conferences, and the historic Dandi March of 1930 protesting against the SALT Act are the highlights of the Gandhian era, and especially after 1942 the Quit India movements becomes the movement of the nation, and afterwards the Britishers realized that now we cannot rule this country under the leadership of Gandhiji, and ultimately the Britishers realized the hard reality that they have to leave this country and grant independence. And of course, external forces like the happening of the Second World War in 1939 to 45 will reduce England not as a colonial power, and the England itself suffered heavy losses in the Second World War, and that ultimately leads Britishers to accept the demand of our Swaraj. And in 1947, India attains freedom under Lord Mountbatten, who was the last Viceroy, and India Independence Act is passed on July 18 by the British Parliament, and India gets the much awaited freedom on 15th August 1947. So, the entire duration of events, sequence of events, we call it as the Gandhian era, and under the single leadership and the very effective charismatic leadership of Mahatma Gandhi ji, India attains freedom from the British colonial rule. So, all these sequence of events will make an interesting study and also informative study for the younger generation like you, and you have to prepare for the freedom movement and the discussion on modern India, not only from the examination point of view. As citizens of India, we have to know about our interesting freedom movement, where with the sacrifice of thousands of freedom fighters and revolutionaries and the sacrifice of leaders like Mahatma Gandhi ji, who laid down his life, he fell a martyr's victim to the bullets of Nathuram Godse, who shot him dead on January 30, 1948. So, that ends the Gandhian era, and ultimately India gets freedom from the British rule. And historians like Dr. Bipin Chandra beautifully says the pleasure of freedom was diluted by the pain of partition. No doubt we were happy that we got freedom, but our country was divided into India and Pakistan under the Mountbatten Plan of 1947, and country was divided into two sovereign nations, Pakistan led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah and India led by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru as the first Prime Minister. So, like that, all these quick sequence of events will take you to understand in nutshell how the India is going to come out of the colonial power of the Britishers, and this sequence of events we have to study in a very systematic way. And the main study references which I would like to recommend for you for the modern Indian history is the textbook prescribed by the UPSC of standard 12, major themes on modern Indian history, and the most authentic book for the modern Indian history, India's Struggle for Freedom by Dr. Bipin Chandra, and Advanced History of India by Dr. R.C. Majumdar. These two are the standard study material for reference for the students on modern Indian history. So, in a nutshell, the country which was taken over by the colonial forces in 15th century, and in 1947 India liberated itself, and a new journey of India starts from 15th August from the rampart of the Red Fort as a symbol of, as a memory of a country which slipped into the hands of colonial rule, but on our own unity and on our own national freedom movement we are going to get out of the colonial rule, and India sets for a new journey from 1947 onwards, and under the leadership of V.R. Ambedkar, we will draft our own new constitution, and from 1950 India becomes a republic, and the new journey of India as an independent sovereign nation commences on 26 January 1950, which we call as the study of the post-independent India, which we will discuss in another session with you. Thank you.